Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to cover an interesting subject. I'm going to call it genetic harmony. It doesn't have anything to do with necessarily race harmony. It has to do with genetics. And here is the dilemma we're going to talk about in this particular episode, which is that we know that various parts of the world are way ahead of other parts of the world, right? We know that for a fact. We know that organizations have taken advantage of these differences, right? You have a tribe in Africa that lives on top of a mountain or by a mountain or on top of land that has a resource that some other country wants access to because they've invented a product that needs the resource below them. In reality, that product will only probably be competitive for 50 to 100 years. And so in the 50 to 100 years, that product's going to be really popular among men. They're going to rape the land underneath this tribe. They don't want to get any blood on their hands, and so they go to the tribe next door that's perhaps slightly more sophisticated, and they offer them money and wealth and status within their own realm, which costs them pennies on the dollar, this third party. And they say, you can have all this if you just go and kill that tribe over there, because we want the stuff underneath their land. We have all these technologies that make the world seem smaller, right? We have the internet. We have cameras everywhere, both professional and probably 98% personal cameras on telephones. So the whole world's being recorded and captured by all these surveillance companies, right? And agencies. What made the world seem big? The world seemed big because we didn't know what was over the elephant bone graveyard, over the hill, across that ocean. That made it seem big. But in reality, the world's always been the same size. We keep getting told that, the world was just discovered by white man as soon as the white man got there. But every time we ever get anywhere, there's always something else that was there before. And with all these cultures that were well embedded into desert communities and Alps and we just kind of minimize their existence, right? Now, the world has been inhabited for way longer than we are taught. They use this fake Ice Age thing to make you think it all got erased. In season 1, I gave an analogy that's very, very important to remember. I give it all the time to friends of mine, and I really just see a huge epiphany on their face. And the analogy was the royal family, the Windsor family of Britain, who do take these safari journeys down to Africa, and they have a whole celebration that's given in their name, and they smile and they have a good time. And then after it's all over, my story starts. And my story starts that Charles, forgive me for victimizing this poor man, but he pulls you aside up on a little ridge, and there's the dance going on. It's already happened. Everyone's finishing up their food and drink and whatever is going on. He points at the crowd, and he says, or the tribe, and he looks at you, and he goes, "Now do you see why we have to get rid of them all?" And you're like, well, what are you talking about? Why are you even here if you're thinking about hurting these people or getting rid of them? He says they're 3,000 years behind the rest of us. What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do with a whole civilization that is essentially impossibly behind the rest of us? There's no technology, there's no method of teaching that really has been invented to get these folks to our level, right? Now, you might think we don't have to do anything, we can leave them alone. And that's kind of where I'm going to go in a few of the suggestions here. But the problem that's going on that you can see is that genocide is being orchestrated by those who want the land, those who want the stuff in the land. Perhaps they want the sky, I don't know. But they want there to be absolutely no threat. They want total and utter control. And when you want to do that to another society, you realize you run into a lot of problems, a lot of logistics. Do we ever talk about this? Do we ever talk about how we're going to handle regions of the world that are 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, or perhaps even 10,000 years behind the rest of the world? And again, it's usually only in technology. You're going to find extremely wise people in these tribes. They're going to know all these life hacks of how to survive, right? They're going to be in perpetual balance with nature on a physical level. There was a survival show I saw once where this white guy went to Australia to cross one of their deserts, and he brings everything. He's got all his survival background. I don't know if he had military background, but he definitely had a huge background in surviving hostile environments. And he goes up against this old man, looked like Morgan Freeman, this Aborigine guy, who just had like a gallon of water with him. He wore a suit and just walked across the desert, no problem. And the white guy gave up. I think he was like a third into the desert, and he was just getting eaten up by bot flies and all kinds of stuff. Now, he's trying to create a show that's going to wow you and all that, but I dare say that was the eventuality that was going to occur no matter what. So what did the Aborigine do to get across the desert? Well, he knew the technology necessary to engage his indigenous world. The other dude didn't. Now, perhaps the white boy would do better crossing some Swiss Alps. Hell if I know. Now, we have laws in the world that say you can't kill people, right? And yet they don't really get applied very well in the world, right? We have countries all over the place that are all upside down. And you have countries that have pretty much fully functional societies. They differ greatly from the West methodologies and morals, but we still rationalize with our citizens through some propaganda machine why we should go kill the folks that happen to have a resource underneath their land that is really, really avidly sold in the world, like oil. For the ones that are in South America, well, they usually have trees. In Africa, they have uranium and diamonds and gold. And, Africa is the most untapped continent on this planet as far as I'm aware. Okay? The challenge is that if we're going to be big grown-up globalists, right, and, obviously no one on this show wants to be a globalist, but if you're not going to take, and if we aren't going to take the advice or objectives which are littered with nefarious undertones and death and genocide, right, if we don't want to see the world get just erased, then we're going to have a methodology to deal with it. But there's some people that are going to argue profusely about the idea that, you can't enable certain sectors of the world to have certain technologies because they'll go nuts with it and they'll stop hurting each other and eventually they'll hurt those who gave them the weapons. And, and I think in a lot of cases that makes sense, right? If someone brings you a bunch of weapons to hurt your own people, well, obviously that's the person that needs to go, not you, not your neighbor down the street. But this is played out all over the world, isn't it? Right? And I hate to mention any specific cases because it sounds like I have a bias. I don't. There's just very profound cases in the world where we can point a finger and go, you see what happened there? That has to stop. In Africa, it has been a victim of this circumstance for a very, very long time. They go to, again, a civilization that has figured out, radio and, you know how to buy products and live a relatively normal life as compared to the first world countries. And then these corporations move in and say, if we give you a ton of money, we go kill those tribesmen over there that are still painting themselves every morning a particular clay color. When they choose their spouse, they're looking at who jumps higher. Because come on, look at them. They're a million years behind you. You're so much more sophisticated. We, as whoever these corporations are, have chosen you. You're the chosen ones. You're the smarter ones. Get over there and get rid of them, and then we will spoil you with riches. And that's what they do. They actually follow up with their riches, too. But again, it's only riches compared to their local region, which is pennies on the dollar for what's being taken out of the ground over there once that other tribe's killed, right? Imagine taking out of the ground, 100 tons of uranium that's worth, I don't know, $50 billion. But the price tag to buy that is $5 million to a warlord, maybe $50 million, right? You're paying less than a single percent investment to get a $50 billion stash out of the ground over there. And because there's no regulations and nothing that protects the world, they can leave it just a burned out husk of itself, right? There was a lot of, I forgot the gentleman's name, but there's the guy that did the bell curve test for genetics. He did it on a racial level. And what he was able to sort of bake in his data was that certain races are smarter than other races. And his assertion was that the genetic pool is less than another genetic pool. Now, that was very unpopular. It obviously hurt people's feelings. But there's truth to it, unfortunately. And the truth really has to do with your necessities in life, right? If you don't need to mature and need to develop technologies well beyond where you are, then you're in balance with nature, right? So there's a lot of these tribes that still hunt animals every morning and live very primitive lives. They're in total balance with nature as compared to us, who feel like we need to, pull lithium out of mountains in North Korea so we can put them in our batteries and build devices that we have to have that then we throw away every year and a half because they are too slow, right? Necessity is one part of development of intelligence, right? You need to develop beyond where you are. Well, that's the only reason why we ever invent anything, right? Now, exploration is another thing, right? As I always say on this show, patterns are what cause humanity to explore. When we get tired of a pattern, we go for bigger patterns and different patterns, Imagine you're landlocked your whole life and then you jump in a boat and you start sailing the sea and you find another piece of land. Once you have that experience, you're pretty damn addicted to, holy shit, there's a whole nother planet out there I need to get explored, right? Now, the first organic side of genetic intelligence has to do with necessity. Okay, put that aside on the left. On the right side, you have oppression. You want to be smarter. Maybe perhaps you were smarter at one point. You had emerald cities and all kinds of wild stuff, but someone came in who was violent and knocked it all down and then put you in shackles and held you down, and you couldn't get any further in life. As each generation is born, they don't get the knowledge that you had to give them. So their brains, which were born fairly intact and fairly detailed inside, the number of neurons, genetic neurons from your protein patterns that go into your child start to diminish because they're not thinking anymore. It's happening in America every day, right? So that's the right side of the equation. I know that there have been sort of really primitive experiments that tested taking people from the wild and pulling them into modern society. There's been a few rich people that took people straight out of jungles and straight out of deserts and put them into penthouse suites, and they came back a month later and the place was a jungle inside because no one had taken them aside and said, this is what this is. Or even if they did, the words coming out of their mouth made absolutely no sense. The necessity that first world country people have developed for themselves don't make any sense to someone from a more homogeneous world. So the idea that one person is winning because they have more synaptical patterns and they can solve, algebra equations versus a group of folks that live in perfect harmony and wherever they're from is a fallacy. It's a misclassification of superior genetics. It is simply different genetics. When you see images and videos and documentaries on these tribes, you see a very peaceful culture in most cases, if they're not being cornered by a corporation trying to chop down their rainforest or, again, incubate a war against them. As long as that's not occurring, they live pretty basic lives. We know from modern society, they're winning. and we're losing. Our notion is that we are pushing forward through all this pain to get us to a new pinnacle of mankind that then perhaps can be more balanced. And then at that point, in some George Jetson world, perhaps you could bring a person straight from the desert and they go straight into this new world. And they're like, well, this is different for sure. I got to learn how to do a few things, but I don't have to learn how to drive. I don't learn how to make your food because your machines make it for me. I don't have to worry about where I'm sleeping at night because it's all set up. It's automated, right? We're not there yet. If there, truly is some space threat towards this planet and we don't have protectors and we're truly this insignificant bacteria on this ball, but we develop technology to build, agrodomes and space stations and sort of those floating worlds out in space, and we can get somewhere else and we don't die to radiation and things, then this battle will have been worth it, right? So let's pretend in this episode that we have been tasked with dealing with this problem, because I think it is it's not really like an impending problem, except for the fact that we know that people exploit these groups of people around the world, right? And if we care about our fellow man, we're talking about usually a very small population of people that are being exploited by this. In some cases, the population of these individuals is well controlled. The tribes that I have seen that they have discovered in South America have very low populations. Some of the folks that they have discovered in Africa have gigantic populations. It's sort of their pastime to procreate because there's nothing else to do. And they're in Africa, most of the tribes are well aware of the first world. They wear T-shirts and stuff that say Nike on them. They've got a radio, they got a TV, but very little else. Whereas in South America, you might see a pot or a pan or a knife. Looks like it's from the first world, but there's plenty down there that haven't been that discovered. They haven't been interacted with. They also, these groups that are, again, probably at a minimum, 1,500 to 2,000 years behind the rest. I mean, think about this. Let's do a little bit of math here. You find a tribe out there. I don't care where you find them. They have mud huts. They hunt for their food every morning. All of their food creation is by hand and using pottery at best, but usually a rock or a stick or something that's been carved down. And you think about where the Romans were in the year 0 AD, or whatever the hell you want to call it. They had aqueducts. They had legions. They had made iron. They had trebuchets and all kinds of stuff, right? I mean, they not quite trebuchets, but they had a lot of siege weapons. They had chariots. They had figured out how to dress a horse in armor, right? They knew how to build pyramids and colosseums and temples of incredible detail. Look at the Egyptians, which, if Graham Hancock is correct, you're talking about a civilization that existed around 39,000 BC and before, building pyramids based on pi. But even if you take the normal years that they give you in history, it's 3200 BC is when the first Great Pyramid was supposedly built. And again, I think this has been debunked photographically by filming the number of pharaohs that existed inside this one temple that has all the years and the months over their dynasties. So either someone in these tribes is still building mud huts, okay, at a minimum is 5,200 years behind the rest of us. Or they might be, 45,000 years behind the rest of us. Like, what if we said, call us when you build a pyramid. Call us when you've learned how to build a structure out of stone pillars that have reed tops and, you have a burial ritual that is very developed. Let us know when you have a super sophisticated scientific example of what you think the stars are. Let us know when you figure out where you think the sun is in relation to Earth. Hell, for flat earthers, The thing is let us know when you figure out that the sun and the moon are only 3,200 miles up in the air and that we're in a firmament dome. Yeah, it goes on and on and on. So just at face value, we can easily prove that these tribes are thousands of years behind us. All right, you get it. So let's throw some very basic solutions out there and let's pick them apart. Well, for those of you who've seen HBO's Westworld, you know what it's like for them to quarantine a piece of land that's very large, to terraform it to look like Arizona or Japan, or I think you're going to see the medieval sort of King Arthur days, if they stick with the movie script. I think India's definitely been established, or some sort of, maybe it's even African safari. I'm not quite sure what happened in that season 5, or was it episode 5 intro. None of this will ruin it for you at all, by the way. So let's say we do that. Let's say we build big quarantine spots where these people go. We do one in South America, in the jungle, in the rainforest, where they're used to it. They don't even know it's happening. We determine a diameter of a sphere, or I should say a sphere, but a border around their world. And we just simply say, hey, everyone, we're all signing a world treaty that says you can't fly over these zones. You can't chemtrail them. You can't fly rockets over them. Satellites have to avoid being detected. You can't visit. Yeah, we'll surveil, the region to see how they're developing. But overall, we leave them alone. In terms of the real estate of the world, it's a dot. It's nothing, right? Africa, same thing. You quarantine a giant part of the desert, and you make it look natural. Haven't you guys seen the landscaping work that happens when they dig out a mountainside and then they want to run a highway by it, and they build faux rock instead of big cement walls because it looks more natural? We could do it. Ask Disneyland. They just built Radiator Springs from the animated series Cars. Well, if you stare down the street, you're looking at Radiator Springs, a huge fake mountain side that covers up LA. More accurately, Anaheim. But that would be a huge expense, wouldn't it? A huge expense, and what we get out of it? Well, maybe it's not about us, right? What if you had a tiny tribe that was, it's spread out all over the place, let's put it that way. It's spread out all over the place, and you got to move a tiny tribe inside this region without them really knowing what's going on. You don't want to pollute them with seeing, modern vehicles, what have you. So we'd have to pull some sort of stunt, right? You'd have to put them all to sleep, gently, carefully. You'd have to have the right dosage for a child and an adult. Then you pick up all their stuff and you move it to a new location. So their hut's exactly the same, but they're going to wake up and find out the landscape changed a little bit. You put them far enough away from the other tribes, it's going to take a certain number of years for them to even know that another tribe exists. Maybe just like in 2001, you drop a monolith that can teach them something. I don't mean literally, but I mean something that would ebb their mind a little bit closer to where they might be, right? Help them out. Almost every tribe has a religion, a system of belief of where things come from. How would you learn about their system of belief without letting them know you exist, right? The old sociological experiment problem of observing a group of people without letting them know you're observing them, thus changing who they are. Now, most of these tribes have been touched by humanity, and someone knows. A photographer knows, an anthropologist knows, someone knows something. Maybe that's enough information. Maybe it's not. Maybe our decision is to say that is not going to work. That is not economically feasible. So our only other option is to integrate them. Without committing a crime, is to integrate them into our society. It's funny, just talking about this and thinking about all the agendas that we've seen hatched around the world for population control, You can imagine someone piping up at one of these, Rothschild meetings going, oh, this is easy. We'll sterilize them all. And so they live a perfectly complete life, but they can't procreate. Voila. Within one generation, they're completely exterminated. I think that's what's going on right now. Again, I think the last time I heard or read, I should say, an article about the South American tribes that are stuck in these sort of rainforest areas, the rainforests have been sold off by the respective countries to China or Russia, or I don't think America really has a lot of access to that stuff anymore. I think we went first. But these tribes are right now, as of 2018, sort of in an impending doom problem where, just like the old movies where you got a fleet of bulldozers coming at them, that's sort of what's about to happen as it all gets clear cut down. The dilemma comes back to this problem that we have in the world, which is to say, are we going to eventually force every single person to be exactly the same, with the exact same rules, right? We know there's parts of the world where 80-year-old men take 7-year-old brides. We know there's a part of the world where women get castrated so that they have absolutely no capability of being really pleasured in the ultimate way, because it's just too messy. If women start living for that, then they'll start cheating, and men run the world, and women are just there to have kids. There's certain areas of the world right now which sit on top of trillions of dollars worth of yearly income that believe this. All of the countries that seem to have figured out equality are depopulating by themselves. They've allowed sterilization food supplies, like GMO food supplies, to get integrated into their society unannounced, thus messing up the gut, right? A small footnote to that, just so you guys can track this in your own brain. No one ever told America that GMO was being integrated into our food. And the interesting thing about that is that we all of a sudden had a lot of people with gut problems. Some of you will remember when Olean was added as a saturated fat substitute, I think, and everyone went and bought chips, and they said you're going to get runny bowels if you eat Olean. And I went and got a thing of like Lay's chips. Yeah, Frito-Lay's chips. Not Frito-Lay, but Lay's chips. Ate it, immediately got what they said. Sore gut, like a crampy gut. And it wasn't good, right? But as soon as GMOs hit, everyone had gut problems. And then they had the demonization of gluten. It's gluten-free. Why gluten? Because gluten is a repository for glyphosate. What happens when this stuff gets in your gut? Well, it destroys your gut. It destroys the tendrils in your intestinal lining that absorb all of your nutrients in your body. And so then what else exploded around the same time that GMOs started to get in overdrive, starting to get into absolutely everything? Probiotics. I live in a community that has 3 or 4 gigantic probiotic corporations that serve the community. Because probiotics can't live a long time, they have to get them made locally and shipped directly to you. And people have to eat probiotics so they don't have gut problems, because they do not know the GMO is their normal problem, right? Now, it's been proposed several times. The society got super advanced and then super retarded, and then super advanced and super retarded. Happens over and over and over again. Look at the Egyptians. The Egyptians are building obelisks, the size of like small skyscrapers, even though a lot of them didn't get erected at the last phase, but they built the pyramids. The pyramids are based on pi. The pyramids are actually 4 corners being built into a pyramid. They're also aligned with celestial bodies. Not only their placement on the Giza Plateau, but a lot of the windows in these structures, including the Sphinx, which according to Graham Hancock, in its original form, the body of the Sphinx was a chamber that you went into, and it was a star chamber. You looked up through windows, and certain times of year with the winter solstice, summer solstice, and all the equinoxes, the stars that were important would line up in the windows. We think it was actually the constellation Leo initially, and then eventually turned into a pharaoh. It's a theory. Makes sense. 35,000 BC would have been the last time Leo was actually present in the sky directly above the Sphinx, giving us a notion, a clue of how far back they had actually achieved this amazing accomplishment. If the pyramids are truly a battery, like we believe they are, with conductive stones, conductive limestone on the inside, non-conductive on the outside, red granite on the hallways and the corridors. Remember, there are no, torch marks in this place. The fires weren't burned to create light. But even during the brightest day in Egypt, as soon as you walk inside one of these pyramids, you weren't able to see anything in front of your face. So it did not appear that anyone was dragging fire with them. We know that the only fire that we could have dragged in there would have been very toxic for humans to breathe. It would have burned up all the oxygen very quickly. So we do believe that perhaps electrical methods were used inside the pyramid. And if this thing was on, and again, all the veneering stone that's non-conductive has been removed except the capstone area of the Great Pyramid, they could have just brought in a device that took electricity and it just lit up. You just bring a light bulb with you and you hold it in your hand and the thing turns on. You walk around the inside of this place, right? So you might have a purist get to this debate and simply say, well, this has happened a bunch of times. This simply needs to continue happening a bunch of times, maybe millions of years, okay? And again, for anyone who believes that meteorites hit the earth all the time and blah, 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 again, it must be pretty rare. Okay, it must be really, really rare. And again, look at my video on Do Craters Exist to maybe remove a lot of fear-mongering that you've had injected into your mind by space agencies that want you to pay them $60 million a day so that they will chase maybe non-existent threats out of the sky, right? But back to our debate. What do? Do we figure out how to take them through the old experiments that we went through to get to where we are, except we put them back to back? We simply say, well, where are they? In the history of those of us who we believe are really sophisticated, how do we get to where we are? And can we take them through that? Avoiding a lot of the acidic stuff like war, like greed, perhaps. Who knows though, right? The Masons did really, really well because the Masons could build societies. That's why they were special. They were able to build structures. They were able to build not only survivable structures, but temples where you could go and worship your god of choice. The number one thing a Mason did to gain super popularity was to build a water well. Because once you have a steady supply of water, you have the ability to build a society around that water well. Huge. Absolutely huge and primitive. Isn't that interesting? What do they do in Star Trek when they want to go visit a primitive society? They do plastic surgery on their face if there's any biological difference. They put clothes on that match the region. They typically try to use their universal translator to speak the language so that they can't be figured out. And they go make contact, right? Maybe where possible, we do the same thing. With any region of the world, there's always the genetics that are very similar. Now, of course, if you're made of the same racial genetics, you can usually see the distinctions between someone 100 miles away and your own genetics. I would assume that a lot of these tribes have inbreeding qualities that keep them very pure in terms of their appearance, right? The idea would be to get inside of their world, of this particular strategy, I should say. And again, drop hints, drop little notions, little tidbits that are been play tested in, groups, philosophers and historians and other people that are very close to these tribes who have made it to the next level. And people who know their religion, What if someone worshipped a cow and someone mentioned for a second that you could eat a cow? Well, that would be a really bad thing, right? You would go from being potentially a solution to being, a really bad person in their world. Now, what benefits could we have by perhaps seeding them with more technology? Just interesting stuff. Again, Faraday, 1830s. This dude had, I think his paper said that, his entire laboratory was essentially wood wires and magnets with nails and that kind of stuff, just basic stuff. This guy became the godfather of electricity. Maybe we simply provide the basics and see what happens. But now, let me ask you. I think our goal would be to say one of the tribesmen, and I say that in generic gender sense, figures this stuff out. And he's doing really well, or she's doing really well. And our hope is that they share it immediately with their tribe. Go tell your other tribes member what you figured out. But maybe the guy or girl doesn't want to. Maybe they're fearful of the repercussions of perhaps black magic accusations. Remember, we went through a witch hunt, literally, in this country. And maybe you had people that were trying to curse people and they needed to be smacked down, but some people may have just figured out something that looked freaky. Cigars. Real interesting thing about cigars. I forget the gentleman's name. It's I think it's a Spanish name. But one of the adventurers who came to the United States, or I should say North America, who had discovered tobacco being rolled by the Native Americans. He brought back bundles of tobacco to Europe. He was smoking, and I've heard two different versions of the story. One of them was that he came home and rolled up a cigar and simply took in a cloud of smoke and retrohaled it out of his nostrils. And when his wife saw it, she freaked out, ran out the door, called the cops on him, and he was put away for like demon possession until he could prove what he was doing. The other side of the story was that he was actually in a pub or something and did the same thing and everyone freaked out. So you can see how amazingly primitive things can go awry. So, best intentions can go completely wonky if we want to intervene. If we quarantine these people, there could be a moral sort of opinion by the population to say, you have no right to do that. And we would say, why? What are you talking about? And they'd say, well, what if they did want to go on a big journey and they hit the edge of this thing? That would have been a natural progression of their adventure, and you're stopping them from their normal progression. Now, I think there's a lot of counter logic to that because they remain hidden in some cases. Like these tribes, we're still finding them around the world. They remain hidden because they do stay in the same spot, Now go to the first world / third world countries. Give you a first world problem. In America, 40 to 50 years ago, people were not morbidly obese like they are today. Children were barely obese, okay? You would get a couple, right? And it's the parents feeding the kid cake too much, right? It's always the parents' fault, always. But we started doing fast food. And when fast food hit, this place turned into, third act of Wall-E. We got blimps everywhere, right? Now, we had perfected this fast food thing and sent it over to England. My buddy Robert Llewellyn in England. I was asking him about, the fact that when I visited over there, it was like 3 times in 1 year, I noticed that the really young people who wouldn't be remotely heavy in our world were gaining weight in really strange ways, right? Like they'd have big, giant pockets of fat in areas of the body that we simply don't gain it over here. And the reason why was sort of a twofold answer. He goes, look, I have watched this happen since the 70s. And he goes, as soon as your McDonald's got here, we had huge health issues. And he goes, both of us kind of deduced that it was like the people who were getting heavy had never been exposed to such food before. And so their bodies were gaining weight in areas that they wouldn't normally gain weight simply because they didn't have a history of fighting off all this fat. It's really sad. Think about first world products getting into third world countries. You have countries that are very balanced. Then all of a sudden, they're wanting cell phones, right? There's women in India who are getting hysterectomies for a cell phone. That's the exchange. To reduce world population, a hysterectomy, you get rid of your ability to have children. Now, I'm hoping to God that the backstory behind that is that these women already have all their children, and they're simply saying, "Yeah, I was going to get it anyway, so might as well get a cell phone for it." My fear is that it might be an 18 to 25-year-old female that's never had a family yet, and before she has the intellectual capacity to weigh what she is sacrificing, her whole body, the whole mechanism in her body to have a child has been removed. You could never put that back. You could tie a tube and then untie it, but you can't repair a hysterectomy, right? As soon as America started attacking the Middle East after a Desert Storm, way back in the early 90s, well, you're talking about a country that forbids you from drinking alcohol. You can be killed as a result of turning up drunk in certain areas. But they had huge outbreaks of cocaine, heroin, all kinds of drugs started moving into their countries. We had destroyed their world, so it's depressing to be there. And hey, if you take a hit off some drugs, it'll make you feel a little bit better. It's not like it's the first time that some of those drugs had been grown there and enjoyed as a pastime of perhaps even a religion at times, but I think we're well past that, and the quantities and the methodologies of which it is applied today is almost purely destructive to their kind. So we have seen these marvels of first world pastimes and inventions absolutely tamper with the normal development of society in every region of the world, right? Have we really figured out the social impact of social media to first world countries, the damage that's about to occur to our future generations if they can't get out of this mess? I don't know. I think we have major hints of what's going on. For those of you who follow Black Mirror on Netflix, Season 3, Episode 1 is about a girl who's addicted to this application on her telephone that is a global application where everyone rates everyone else. So if you're an asshole, you get down thumbs. If you're a nice person, you get up thumbs, and you have this sort of total economy of your behavior in society. And they built a whole episode around that. Okay, well, China has one of those apps. It is currently a private sector app that you can electively download, but they're currently saying that the country is going to make it mandatory in 2 years. In a year and a half, 2020, China's going to force every single citizen to have this app and to rate each other. If you don't know how devastating that can be, go watch the third season, first episode of Black Mirror. It's terrifying as to how social media could get sort of the trough feeders to control society, right? I mean, on one level, it sounds great. Yeah, we want assholes out of this planet. We want them to stick out like a sore thumb. You know, you're being a jerk. Stop being a jerk. That sounds great. Take it to another level. Someone believes something completely different than you. They think that the God that you worship is annoying, fake, the reason why the world sucks. And every single time you go to your church, they just drive by you, and because this phone thing has a proximity identifier, right? They don't even know you. All your names show up as you're walking into your church, and they're just all down, 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 down. And the more secular we go, the easier this little avalanche can go. What if you like to partake in, I mean, this is where it gets into a global problem. You like to partake in content on the internet that is deemed completely illegal in other parts of the world. What do you do about that when you try to visit over there, right? What if they just look at you and you know that they eat dogs and they know you watch porn, and so you just see each other and you just go at it, you know? We're not ready for that sort of system to be put in place, in my opinion. We're probably, 1,000 years ahead of this question ever really being answered or dealt with. But I thought it'd be interesting to get into this and start seeing sort of, your opinions of what are potentially not problems that are perceived as problems, things that are problems that aren't perceived as problems, For those of us who grew up without the internet and all the technology that is integrated into the internet, we know that the world was a better place in many ways without it. It was better that the phone rang and either it was busy because you were on the phone or it rang forever because you were not home. And people just sort of learned your routines and they didn't call you at certain times of day. You know, I have friends of mine and we're all guilty of this, but every single time their phone rings, they feel like they have to answer it. It's like it's their moral imperative to answer every single phone call. The second that someone demands that they answer their phone, I'm calling you, you must answer it. And man, they will be in the conversation with you on the phone, in some super productive conversation, and they're hopping out because some random number is calling them, instead of just letting it go to voicemail. They have been trained like Pavlov's dog to worship text messages, to worship telephone calls, to worship every notification from every social media app that they have. They feel like they are missing out. I think that's dying off. You know, all the reports are that a lot of social media is dying off. I will definitely tell you that there's a group in the world that participates in running the world that would love for that to happen on one level. Hey man, let's get back to the point when nobody was informed about anything and we totally controlled the world. Imagine, just as an example, that every single social media mogul out there, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Google, YouTube, because it's owned by Google, all of them go out of business and they can run a cover story of a scandal. They're violating First Amendment or whatever. They all go out of business, financial problems. Think of any crime you could possibly accuse these companies of and their CEOs and their employees, and it all goes out of business in like a year. Then we're without social media. And you're thinking, oh, well, there'll be replacements. No, because the things that brought them down restrict you from ever being in that category as well, right? No one in the United States of America, as far as I know, is allowed to make a free dating site anymore because of a human trafficking problem that we have in the world. So a few bad apples actually mess it up for a bunch of people that are, finding their spouses and being married on these services. So the only ones that can exist today are the ones that take credit cards because it's not anonymous, which is kind of not the truth because people, as I understand it, you could buy a credit card and just, some prepaid card that you can take around as like a homeless person. So you could sign up and completely fake who you are. You could use someone else's photograph, a bunch of fake bio stuff, and say, meet me at this place, and we'll go out and get drinks or have dinner or whatever, and it's some bad situation. Turns into a human trafficking situation. Somebody dies. It's interesting, right? There have been a lot of rumors around Agenda 21, which is now called Agenda 2030. And the sources are pretty hearsay-ish, so please take what I'm about to say with a massive grain of salt. But when you think it through, if this isn't true, and again, it's been spoken over 20 years, if not even 40 years, from a bunch of different sources. I don't know if this is like a UFO phenomenon that everyone's carrying this story arc forward, but the story goes is that those that I would say pre-QAnon who control the world, the deep state, have wanted to take Earth back to sort of the Middle Ages where we have very little population on this planet, less than 100 and probably less than 200 million, I would say, especially related to the Guidestones, Georgia Guidestones, which say under 500 million. Again, as we say on the show, no one's going to want maximum capacity on the first day. So if they set a limit at 500 million, they're going to probably want to start around 100, 150, which is 99.9% of the population disappearing. But they've said they want to go backwards. They're going to use technology to control any of the masses that are allowed to exist. They're going to live, I guess, supposedly some euphoric world with giant plush land. And they're going to be so intellectual, they're going to know how to live without really human interaction other than their own families. I mean, how many families would there be involved? You'd have to have a certain minimum number of families just to keep from inbreeding too much and getting all of them, mentally impaired. For those of you who've missed the movie Logan's Run back in the 70s, it's a really powerful movie to watch because in this movie, you weren't allowed to make it to the age of 30. And so when you're 29 years old, I believe that's the year, you had this little crystal that was, I believe, inside your palm or on your wrist or something. And when you reached an age where you were supposed to die, they called it renewing, and you were celebrated in your death. But no one ever made it over 30. If you could imagine how, if you're over 30, the more you're over 30, that notion's crazy. You know, it's like, Jesus Christ, you barely figure out who you are at 30, right? There's something called predictive programming, which is to say we would like to do something that society doesn't currently buy into. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a bunch of movies go out there, television shows, and we're going to prime the pump with our agenda and just see how it reacts. And we're going to put some of the most brilliant minds in Hollywood, the most brilliant writers, to philosophize these potential solutions, to take them further. Star Trek has a lot of this DNA in it. But Logan's Run is one of these. Rollerball, 1975, is one of these. Even the movie Brazil is one of these by Terry Gilliam. They play tested. And again, I've said this once in a previous episode. I know you guys are probably tired of me saying that, but I'm saying this, you know, I don't have like some timers. One of the things we do in major corporation initiatives, let's say you have a multi-billion-dollar company. When I worked at Electronic Arts, we were a multi-billion-dollar company. Okay. I think when I got there in 1999, we were celebrating a $1 billion year, and then the next year, I think we hit 3. I mean, it was amazing how fast we were growing. We were number 1 in the world at the time. But when we wanted to create EA.com into this gigantic gaming platform, we went off to a retreat in December of 1999 in Palo Alto, California, this really cool building. And this guy led this genius, like just, I don't even know what this guy's background was, but he led us through this simulation of what we were about to do, which is to say, look, there's a million ways to skin a cat, right? Any business initiative you get into is like that. Okay, let's simulate this scenario. And it happens in military all the time. They have tons of software that simulates this stuff, right? If any of you ever watched the old movie War Games back in the early 80s with Matthew Broderick, you know, they had simulations that were simulating global thermonuclear war and, you know, essentially how many warheads do we think Russia has, China has, and let's just start the war and see who wins. And he kept running the simulation. But we were in this room, not planning the end of the world, but planning one of the coolest gaming platforms on planet Earth. And it went for about a week. And the last day, we divided up every person in the room into respective corporations that were going to fight for this space. And we said, look, you're Sony over there, you're Macromedia over there, which has turned into Adobe Flash, because they had flashgames.com, or shockwave.com, sorry. I was in the EA group. And we sat there and ran a simulation, and we had a group that was the press, trying to figure out what was going on. I was the press secretary for the company. And it was the most eye-opening thing ever to find out that what we thought was going to be a smooth ride turned into a bunch of acquisitions, a bunch of controversy, because a couple of the groups had dreamed up a way to sort of marginalize us to the rest of the world. Well, they're not good because of this. It's interesting. This is sort of what I try to do on this show, and a lot of the subject matter is to get us to kind of simulate, as the owners of the problem, what we would do with our layman's knowledge, right? Most of us are in bubbles. We are. I'm in the bubble of the United States of America, and furthermore, I'm in the bubble of California, Southern California. And so my opinions are shaped by the area in which I live. We hive mind, right? Again, you can take a middle-of-the-road American who's a constitutionalist, move them to Seattle, Washington, and they will, if they live 20 years, they'll become usually a liberal. You could take someone out of Seattle, Washington, and move them to Orange County, California. If they stay 20 years, they will start seeing the light of conservatism, you know? We hive mind. We see eventually the deep rationales that that our surrounding humans believe. Even if we were moved again a second time to maybe back to where we came from, we might look at our last 20 years and go, what was I thinking? I was believing all that stuff. Because the deep rationale, the deep algorithm of our minds hives. These cultures that are separate from humanity may just be one of the biggest gems we have on this planet. Now, we know that there are tribes out there that still practice cannibalism. They kill they'll have like a little skirmish with the tribe next door, and they end up eating the other people because they have religion that believes that they gain was a bunch of weird theories I've heard recently last year, but they believe they gain the power of their opponent, and they believe that they, in some cases, are actually honoring their opponent. Now, I'm not sure eating a person has this effect, but there's a lot of you, and I'm just going to digress for 1 second here. There's a lot of you that know that when people get organ transplants, there are certain organs that seem to imbue the recipient with some of the skills of the source person. One of the most famous ones was I think it was a gentleman who got the organs from a small child. We're talking somewhere between 8 and 12. And they ended up becoming an artist and drawing things in the hospitals they were recovering. Not only did they gain the ability to draw, which they had never had before, but they drew pictures that were the exact same sort of pictures that the kid used to draw. And they ended up comparing him in this documentary. And, you can't really trust what you see on TV half the time, right? If not all the time. But if that's true in any way, shape, or form, that's really interesting. So the question might come back on us. Should we be learning something from them? Again, those of us who lived in a more primitive world know that we, at times, were much happier with less. And that's a piece of wisdom you hear all the time. Less is more. Less is more. How much money would you have if your vices in life didn't exist? The things you don't need, the things that you elect to spend your money on, simply didn't exist. What if I didn't smoke cigars? How many thousands of dollars would I save in a year never smoking a cigar? Now, you don't want to be the richest guy in the cemetery, as they say. But perhaps there's some sort of character development that we can get out of these more primitive cultures that we've overlooked. We're so arrogant in our self-assurance that we have got the drop on civilization, when maybe we don't. When you're a technologist, it's actually really interesting to think for a split second that we shouldn't have silicon chips. We shouldn't have miniaturization. We shouldn't have, 7 nanometer CPUs. The ability to, travel across the entire world in an hour because we built some amazing supersonic vehicle. It's hard to buy that that's a bad thing. But what's the angst that's expressed in the first part of this episode? It is that the world is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So the more that we actually perfect technology to start traveling around the world even faster and faster and faster. For those of you who ever had a long distance relationship with someone, and you've just prayed that somebody creates a teleporter, right? A door jamb that you could walk through and it just immediately teleports you to the other person's location. You'll know what I'm talking about. If that were to occur, geez, just think about it. You'd have thieves stealing things out of your house and then just zapping to the other side of the world and divvying up all of your goods. Then you have the question that comes up with your atheist evolutionary people and then your religious God creationism people. Both of you have, I think, a problem, which is that if you're an evolutionist, the idea is, are we intellectually surpassing our genetic programming? Meaning we have, let's just say we have a couple prodigy autist humans, and they have figured out how to do something absolutely extraordinary with the human body and the human mind and with society. And they drop that tech on society, and they do it in a way that everyone can understand it, and it starts to mold us, just like social media. But it has a massive blowback where we start suffering as a result of it. Then as an evolutionist, you might simply say we are not really evolved to the level that we are at today. And then you might either adopt going back to a tribal methodology through some apocalyptic world transformation, or you're saying, well, we just need to be grown-ups. We're going to sterilize all those that are behind. They're going to simply disappear, and then what is left is left. And then again, in another couple of millennia, 10 millennia, we have another discrepancy if we don't build a society that distributes all knowledge and all wisdom and all philosophy equally across all sectors of the world to keep us all at the same exact understanding. Well, could you imagine trying to take the swinger community out of Hollywood and mix them with the Sharia law folks from the Middle East? Someone's going to lose. Someone's going to have to give up their ways, right? If you're a creationist, then God has a much more definitive plan for our existence. And this is where sort of your revelations and a lot of the times when God has reset the world comes into play, right? You've got your Moses story, let's back up. Your Noah story where the world is flooded. And one dude and his family capture all the animals that need to be captured that are going to die as a result of a flood. Probably a lot of other natural, like fish and maybe birds can fly around. They don't need to be captured. But then you have your Moses story. He comes down with the 10 Commandments. He's got a bunch of drunks over there worshiping a calf, and God just wipes him out. He hasn't, in that particular scenario, wiped out all those who dissent against him, but on that particular day, it wasn't the party you probably should have showed up to unless you're going to convert to Moses on that day. You have cities that were turned and raised as wives that look back turned to pillars of salt. Those are reset phases, right? Some people think we're headed for a big reset right now. Do we have harmony right now? Again, as I said earlier in this episode, there's a bunch of tribes in South America that are going to have a real rude awakening over the next 10 years as China cuts down their world because Brazil and Argentina don't give a shit about nature. They've sold off their rainforests. They had a price and they got it. Right? Africa? Well, it's sort of in this constant death spiral, isn't it? It's easy to convince warlords to kill tribes. That's pretty easy. Just buy them off. If that doesn't occur, well, you starve them to death, right? For the tribes that are able to pull it off and keep their numbers limited and hunt every morning and do whatever they do, they just... Their eventuality will be linked to whether or not they are in possession of land that has any appeal to the same countries that buy up rainforests, right? So for any of you who are sort of atheists and evolutionary people, what are your thoughts in the comments? Like literally, how do you perceive this? Is it just one of these benign things where we just let it go and let nature take its course? There's a part of me that understands that. Are you more militant in your thought process as, well, we need to actively exterminate these individuals, sterilize them, kill them, genocide them? Nobody really ever says that that's their opinion, even if they had it. I would like to see something far more productive occur than something like that. If you're very religious, or even mildly religious, and you believe God does participate at a particular percentage of our daily chores, again, he offers us choice, so he doesn't control us 100%, thank God. If you're an ambassador of God, as one of his followers, what do you think God wants you to do? Part of me thinks, well, genocide's not it. Sterilizing wouldn't be part of the game. These are his children as well. So what do you do? Is it blasphemy to turn them into a Westworld? Save the robots. You just basically quarantine them into their own space. Do we go in and try to raise their knowledge and raise their awareness of the universe? Imagine how much stuff we have debunked on this show and debated quite successfully on this show, especially in the comment sections, right? Imagine all these things being brought to these tribes. Al Gore would be the first one over there going, well, there's a lockbox, and inside it is a global warming, and you're burning too many tiki torches here, and blah, 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 blah. It sort of brings to mind the whole notion that we have people who live in areas that get hit by hurricanes. We have people who live in areas that lose their houses every single year to flooding. And in Hawaii, we have folks that are losing their houses routinely, and I mean probably by decade, to volcanic runoff. But we don't really have a cow about it, do we? The insurance companies pay for their homes. They pay a tremendous amount of money for that insurance. And we rebuild them where they are, and then they get wiped out again. And it just rinses and repeats. Seems illogical, but those people are willing to pay the price because they love the area where they live. And even if they couldn't get the insurance, they might find different ways to build homes that don't have vulnerabilities to Mother Nature. It's interesting. My personal angst is that society is misinformed constantly, lied to, for corporate agendas, for world control. I do not believe that we should set every single, region of the world free to procreate infinitely, right? We don't need to have 20 children families anymore. That whole phenomenon occurred where you had, anytime you get, I think, safely speaking, over 5 kids, 6 and above, you have an area of the world typically where they are part of the ecosystem of the family survival. They're farmers, they're manufacturers, they're builders, and these kids are responsible for running off and helping the family exist, to plow the land, to take care of the livestock, whatever. I think we're, in most areas of the world, past that stage if we wanted to. First world countries for sure. Third world countries, well, you have, again, 90% of China is pretty agricultural. Probably a deep 75 to perhaps, 85% of India is the same way. South America's got a lot of that going on. And so if we were to modernize their food supply and simply say, you don't have to do this anymore. You can have a couple kids and maintain world population at the same count, right? You have 1 and then you have 2, and that's the replacement for you and your wife. If you have 3, you increase by 1. But you really, you can be okay with 2 if you want to. You don't have to churn out all these kids. Some of us love kids, right? If we had the chance, we'd have 1,000 kids. But every child deserves a participating parent, don't they? And at some point, you eclipse your ability to check in with all of your kids. I don't know what the threshold is, but I'm sure it's less than 10. Let me know what you think in the comments. This is something that has been churning in my brain for a couple of years since I mentioned it in the first season. You guys are brilliant people, and you're compassionate people, and you're empathetic people. And you have all kinds of wild backgrounds that would probably contribute greatly to the discussion. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. There are audio and video links, a locked Facebook group, a Patreon page, and a store for now. We'll see what happens there. We're coming up on the end of season 3. We're probably, I have about 5 in the queue, so that means we're going to be over 290 real soon here. I'll get the rest of them done in the next 30 days, the last 9. And then I'll take a break for probably a month or so. I like to rebrand the show. I like to choose new music and push out an intro. I'm trying to make the intro not too long, but at the same time, I'm trying to set an atmosphere for you guys. For those of you who know what the show's all about, if you're like me, when you listen to your favorite show, the theme music can start being that Pavlovian trigger of like, here it comes, man, here it comes. When I used to listen to Coast to Coast AM, Dr. Demento, even X-1, the old sci-fi series from the 1950s. When that theme music comes on, man, I get goosebumps. It's crazy. And even if the show sucks, the theme music just helps set the scene. So that's sort of my homage to that Pavlovian trigger. I love it myself, and I hope you guys dig it too. So we'll have some fun. I'm going to hopefully pull in some friends to help me shoot a new intro that has a lot more character to it than the ones that you've seen before. So hopefully you'll dig it when it comes, but that's another 10 episodes away. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.